I taught preschool at First Presbyterian Church in Allentown for 7 years, 5 years as the assistant, and then 2 years as a lead teacher. And I had an unbelievable experience when I was working with my friend Jenny. We had a youngster in the class who was having a lot of difficulty. We were having difficulty controlling him, but all the teachers there taught with their heart, right? And we'd taken some workshops, and so we had an idea that there was something really not quite right about Stephen, that he wasn't just being a bad kid. And so we called the parents in, had a parent-teacher conference. I started the whole session with prayer, and to remind all of us that that Stephen was God's child, and that we were there to see what was the best thing we could do for him. In the end, we referred him on to a behavioral pediatrician, and he was diagnosed with a hormonal problem. At any rate, at the end of the school year, the parents invited Jenny and I out for lunch. And before the lunch, the father, who's clergy, said he wanted to start with prayer, which he did. And in this prayer, he thanked us for our behavior as being truly Christ-like. And my whole body reacted. I got chills, and I knew that this had been an answer to my prayer, because for the 3 years prior to that, I had a daily meditation and prayer practice, and I ended each of those sessions with the request that I be allowed to be a channel of love and blessings to all those with whom I came in contact. And I knew that when this father said this to us, that had been an answer to the prayer. So having had that experience, it changed within me my own self-competence, self-confidence, and from there I started to question whether or not I should be going back to school and to finish the education that I had started several years earlier. And that gave me the confidence to go ahead, and I quit my teaching job, was going full-time, but was very anxious because I was going to have to take algebra. And I failed algebra the first time I was in college, but I knew I could learn it if I started over from the beginning. At any rate, I talked to a friend of mine who was a clinical psychologist, and he gave me some music to listen to so that I could just use some prayer and meditation to, help me, discern why I was really going to school. At any rate, using this guided imagery and music, I did the prayer and meditation, and through that experience, the imagery that came to me was a sense of being sort of transported into an upper realm. And I found myself kneeling at the throne of God. It was a sense of being commissioned by this loving light. And the imagery went on, there was more to it, but I was left with this whole sense that my life was being led, and that getting the degree in psychology, not education, was the correct route for me to take. And so I simply felt that I was being commissioned, and that this was now my calling. And I knew I was doing the right thing by going back to school. Of course, I had to take algebra. And it was a programmed learning, and you worked at your own pace, but you still went to a classroom, and there was a monitor that I don't really know the correct term for this woman who was there, but a couple weeks into the class, she announced that there was going to be a midterm. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I thought this was self-paced, and I had been going very slowly. I mean, I did every problem. I did the pre-test. I did the post-test. I was really serious about learning algebra, right? So I'll ask her what chapters are we going to have to cover for this midterm? So I went up to her after class and I mentioned that I was concerned, and she looked at me and she started shaking her head sideways and going, "How long has it been since you were in school?" And I said, 18 years. And she went, "Oh, I don't think this is going to work." I'm telling you, I was a little speechless, but I left. I went home. The next morning, as I was getting ready to go for the class, I discovered I was having an anxiety attack. I was pacing back and forth in my bedroom. I was getting myself really upset. And I realized, I'm getting out of control here. And I thought, the one thing I can control are my own thoughts. So I went and I sat down on the bed. And as soon as I sat down, I heard these words: "You will always know enough." And those are the exact words that I heard in that earlier imagery before I started school. The morning when I was being commissioned, so to speak, those were the words that I heard: "You will always know enough." And I immediately relaxed, and I was able to go on and go up to Penn State, went in to see the teacher, and told her what was going on, and she did the same thing all over again. "I don't think this is going to work." And I was so shocked. I just couldn't move. And besides, I wasn't leaving her office until I had a better answer. So she finally said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I do the pretest, I do all the problems, etc." And she said, "Just do every other problem and you'll go faster." So I did. And I passed the course. But then I still had to take the real algebra course, and I passed that one very well as well. So the anxiety also with that was the fact that I knew if I couldn't do algebra, I wouldn't be able to do statistics, and I wouldn't be able to get a degree in psychology. But I did, obviously. And it's been a real blessing. And I can remember when I would leave Penn State in the afternoon to go home, I felt like I was on the top of the world because I knew I was doing what I was supposed to do. I felt like I just had it all. Because I also had a loving husband who was supporting me and two great kids, and it was a very good feeling. And I was very fortunate in that I was invited to be a consultant in a pediatric asthma and allergist office. So I was doing family therapy with these children who were supposed to be getting better and weren't. And that was so meaningful and very rewarding. And the parents were happy, the doctor was happy, and it was really quite lovely. But I was also then starting to get more patients who were, just women. I had done one of my internships at Catholic Social Agency, and so I'd been a clinical supervisor over in New Jersey with Catholic Charities. That's where I started working a little bit more with women and spirituality issues. So then when I decided to do the PhD, I was going to do that in spirituality and psychology, and chose to do my dissertation on women's spiritual journeys. I originally was thinking of doing something way more scientific, with ADHD kids, that sort of thing. And I got shingles. And I was with some of my friends from my program, and the one woman said to me, "Carolyn, what about that interest you had in women's spirituality? What about that? Maybe the shingles are really about you're not doing what you're supposed to do." And that just gave me permission to drop the science, the heavy-duty science. I did a heuristic study on women's spiritual journeys, which included mine, and things just then started to fall in place. So listening to these women's stories and just being a witness to their stories was such an honor. And you could see these women were so pleased to be able to tell how they developed over time in a more mature understanding of their faith. It was not an ego thing for them at all. It was something that really came from their heart. And they learned that they had to be able to truly love themselves first. And every single one of those women in the study discovered that they needed to become the subject of their own lives. Because in our society, what happens is we grow up believing we're here to take care of everybody. And we are. I am your brother's keeper, right? But women in particular, we only saw our job as nurturing. And if something went wrong with your children, somehow it was your fault, right? So all of these women in this study learned that, wait a minute, I need to find out who I am, which is what happened for me when I, went back to school and had all those different experiences. I learned that the talent that I had was not being able to paint a picture or compose, a poem or a piece of music. My talent was my ability to be truly present with another person. And that was something that was created in me, and I needed to value it. And all the women in my study discovered who they were at their core and were able to appreciate their own uniqueness as something that was given to them by God when they were created. And so that was the common theme. I'm also involved in researching other women's experience with answered prayer, and I would love to get more examples of that. But my own physiological reaction is not unsimilar to some other people, that I've spoken to, where there is this true sense of knowing that a prayer has just been answered, and it just changes your perspective. It gives you a sense of calm. And so I've been doing a little bit of that. I'd like to have more people. So if anyone's interested in sharing their story with me, I would absolutely love to hear it. My faith is such that, if I walk with Jesus, I am walking in love. And I will share with you also the fact that as psychologist, you have to do your own therapy. And I was doing the training in guided imagery and music. And in those sessions, if you've done a particularly difficult piece of psychological work, oftentimes you will have what is more of a transpersonal experience. And I've had a couple of those where the music, which is providing the container for you, holds you safely, and your consciousness can just grow. And so I've had a couple of experiences like that where I felt as though I was being held, by God. I was in this loving presence. And when you have an experience like that, nobody can ever take that away from you. When you feel that connection and that love, and you know that that's was Jesus' message to us, was to be loving and kind and to share who we are. So that's, I would say, how I've evolved over the years.